This is the second slideshow on the cardiovascular system, and in this one, we're going to be concerned primarily with the heart. And so I have a picture of the Tin Man there because he was missing a heart. We're going to talk about the structures of the heart, the chambers and valves, and the circuits that wind up being fed by the heart. And then we'll talk about how the heart works, a little bit about the cardiac conduction system, and about how the nervous system and to a certain extent the endocrine system can regulate the heart or influence it. Okay, and so it's important to talk, before we talk about the structure of the heart, is to talk about the functions of the whole cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system is a system that is our main transport system in the human body. It transports oxygen, O2, carbon dioxide, CO2. Oxygen is the main thing we need to use the nutrients in food for energy, and the main waste product is carbon dioxide. Our system also transmits other nutrients like sugars and amino acids and lipids, waste products that are going to be removed by the kidney like urea, and signal molecules like hormones. The cardiovascular system is really important for the regulation of body temperature. It controls the movement of blood. It also helps the body regulate its pH and the balance of salts or ions. The cardiovascular system has within it also the elements that can reduce blood loss by causing clotting, and the cells and molecules of immunity that protect us from infection. The heart is one of the key components of this system because the heart generates the pressure that causes blood to flow through the system, and it allows us to transport things very quickly from one end of the body to the other. It generates one-way flow, making sure that things are moving steadily through the system and that there's a continual supply of nutrients and oxygen, and that waste products are rapidly removed. To do this, the heart is really a double pump. It takes care of two circuits, a pulmonary circulation that takes deoxygenated blood, here shown in blue, that comes from the tissues. That goes back to the heart, and the right side of the heart then pumps that deoxygenated or blue blood to the lungs, where carbon dioxide is exchanged for oxygen. And then the blood returns to the heart, and here it's shown as red, and it returns to the left side of the heart, which then pumps it to the rest of the body. And so the right side of the heart serves the pulmonary circulation. The left side of the heart serves the systemic circulation. And so this is a really a key feature of the heart, is that it's two pumps, and we have this double circulation, one to the lungs and one to the body tissues. So then if we look at the heart itself in a little more detail closer, we can see the heart itself is made up of four chambers. On the top there is a right atrium. The right atrium receives that blood from two large veins. These bring oxygen poor blood to the right atrium. The left side of the heart has a left atrium, and that takes blood that comes back from the lungs and is rich in oxygen. And then each atrium has a valve that guards its exit, and that valve then runs into the right or into the lower chambers, the ventricles, a right ventricle and a left ventricle. The right ventricle will pump deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The left ventricle will pump oxygen-rich blood throughout the body tissues. Okay, the left ventricle has a much thicker wall. If you look at it, that wall is very, very thick because it has to pump blood all the way through to the farthest parts of the body. The right side of the heart is thinner. The right side only has to pump to the lungs. Okay, so the two chambers. The upper chambers are the atrium. The lower chambers, two chambers, are the ventricles. Then there are valves, and the valves ensure one-way flow. And so there's a valve between the atrium and the ventricle, These are the AV valves. They also have another name. The valve on the right side between the right atrium and right ventricle is the tricuspid. It has 3 flaps. The valve between the left atrium and left ventricle is the bicuspid. It has only 2 flaps. Okay, and so when the ventricle contracts, that valve shuts and it prevents blood from going back into the atrium. And then there's also valves in the major arteries leaving the ventricles, a pulmonary semilunar valve and a aortic semilunar valve. And when the heart contracts, it forces blood, when the ventricles contract, it forces blood into these large arteries past these valves. And then when it relaxes, the valves prevent blood from flowing back into the heart. So that's what's establishing these one-way flows. Okay, and so I mentioned before there are 2 circuits or 2 systems. The right side of the heart that has the right atrium, the tricuspid valve, the right ventricle, and then the pulmonary semilunar valve, and then blood flows out to the lungs. On the left side of the heart, you have the left atrium, the left atrioventricular valve or bicuspid valve, the left ventricle, and then the aortic semilunar valve, and then blood is pumped out to the body. Okay, and so the heart is just a muscular pump where the chambers force blood into the next system, and then the valves prevent anything from moving backwards. Okay. Oops, I went the wrong way there. All right, so then in addition, the heart also has kind of some special features. It's an unusual type of muscle, and it doesn't require to be stimulated by the nervous system. It has its own specialized cells that start a contraction, and they do this by electrically stimulating other muscle cells. And so the heart has this special conduction system of cardiac muscles that start the contraction and spread it throughout the heart. This is the cardiac conduction system, and it has a pacemaker area in the right atrium. This is called the SA or sinoatrial node, and this is what starts the depolarization, is this region in the upper part of the right atrium. The depolarization spreads throughout both the right and left atrium, and those atrium contract. Okay, there is atrioventricular node then that the wave passes through, and it passes into the muscles of the ventricles. And shortly after the ventricles after the atrium contract, the ventricles will receive that electrical stimulation, and then they will contract. And this is what coordinates the heartbeat, is the system. And so it's the same every time. The system sets its own rate. That rate can be modified by nervous impulses or hormones, but it works on its own. It's kind of self-regulating. We can assess the health of this system with an electrocardiogram, which is just a recording of this electrical activity. And it generally happens, the electrical activity just slightly precedes the contraction. And you can see here the 3 peaks, the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T. The P wave is this small bit of electrical activity, and that happens just before the atria contract. The QRS is a bigger amount of electrical activity, and that happens just prior to the ventricles contracting. And then the T wave is the repolarization of the ventricles. And so we can see all these things, and that can show us nicely what's going on, and if there would be a gap here or an irregular size, it can tell us that there's a specific problem in certain regions of the heart. And so the heart is very self-regulating, but it does have feedback from other systems, and it's influenced by other types of things. One of the most important things, though, is this intrinsic regulation. And the heart responds to the amount of blood returning to the heart, and this is called venous return. And so this intrinsic regulation, as the amount of blood returning to the heart increases, that has a natural tendency to stretch the heart chambers, and this causes an increase in stroke volume, or how much is pumped with each contraction. And the increased stretching also causes the SA node to start stimulating contractions faster. And so it increases the heart rate. And so, to some extent, the heart is intrinsically regulated by the amount of blood returning. And so, if lots of blood is returning to the heart, it pumps faster and with greater stroke volume. The other body control systems can influence the heart, though, and this is referred to as extrinsic regulation. And this is primarily done by part of the nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, or the cardioregulatory system, or sometimes called the medulla oblongata. And this is in the lower part of the brain, in the kind of autonomic regions where we don't really know what's going on as far as consciously, but the brain is monitoring these things subconsciously. And we have nerves that go to the SA node, and these nerves can increase or decrease the heart rate depending upon what the brain thinks needs to happen. And so there are receptors that are located in major blood vessels that can detect changes in pressure. Okay, and that sensory information goes to the brain, and then there's nerves called parasympathetic nerves that can slow heart rate, and then there's also sympathetic nerves that can increase heart rate by releasing chemicals at the SA node. In addition, the nervous system can also send a message to the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland can release hormones into the blood, and these hormones that enter the blood then can act at the heart. This is what we call adrenaline, but the chemical name for adrenaline is epinephrine, and then its other form is norepinephrine, which is noradrenaline. And these will increase heart rate. Okay, this is part of a regulatory system that's another one of these negative feedback systems that helps regulate things like blood pressure. And so whenever blood pressure falls too low, the nervous system will detect that and will send messages that will cause the SA node to increase the rate and force of contraction to return it back to normal. When blood pressure is too high, the cardioregulatory center can send messages to the SA node, causing it to slow contractions and to reduce their force, and so bringing it back into that normal range. Okay, so that's our little presentation on the heart. Remember, the heart is really two pumps, one that supplies blood to the lungs. It does this pulmonary circuit. The other side is the left side, and that pumps blood to the body, or the systemic circuit. Okay, and so each side has two chambers, an atrium and a ventricle, and there's two valves on each side. Okay, in addition, the heart has its own specialized conduction system with its own pacemaker. Okay, and that pacemaker is going to control the rate that the heart beats and the force of contractions. And it's influenced by the rate that blood is returning to the heart, the activity of the nervous system, and hormones that are present. I should say one more thing about the heart. Here we have a view of the human heart, and one of the peculiarities about the heart is that muscle is really dependent on a steady supply of oxygen, which is normally not a problem because the first branch off the aorta, the major blood vessel that comes out of the left side of the heart, this branch receives the most oxygen-rich blood, and that goes directly to the heart muscles, and that blood is traveling through the coronary arteries. Okay, that's really crucial because those coronary arteries are supplying that blood so that the heart can contract. Anything that interrupts the supply of blood in those coronary arteries is potentially life-threatening because heart muscle can't go any time at all without oxygen. It stops contracting, and that means no oxygen gets to the brain or any other part of the body. And so the function of the heart is really super critical because some of our cells can only survive minutes without oxygen, and that includes heart muscle. Okay, so that's kind of setting us up to think about atherosclerosis and hypertension. All right, we'll stop there.